Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Omar Selim. I'm the CEO of Arabesque Asset Management. It's my distinct pleasure and privilege to moderate panel number 3 today. Much better. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Omar Selim, CEO of Arabesque Asset Management. I have the pleasure of moderating panel number 3 today. We're going to talk about integrated reporting and Islamic finance. Something that when you heard it and you thought about the fact that it's just after lunch, you thought maybe I could do my emails. So thank you for staying here, giving us a chance. We hope to make it worth your while. I would love to invite my co-speakers today for panel number 3, starting with Professor Sulaiman from the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Thank you so much. Give us a hand. And would love to continue with Hardik Shah. I have not seen him earlier, but there he is. Wonderful. Hardik Shah, Sector Manager, ESG Research at Sustainalytics in Singapore. And finally, number 3 is Toto, Islamic Finance Research Team Leader from Bloomberg. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So when I read I'm just going to get this, oh my God. When I read the headline, integrated reporting and Islamic finance, I kind of thought, wow, that sounds like a bit of math and a bit of accounting, a bit of religion. You know, what a difficult combination. And what we want to do today is just explain what integrated reporting actually is and the potential it has for Islamic finance. It's like a Venn diagram, 2 circuits which are going into each other, which can help and reinforce each other's messages, but also equally support in its respective fields what these 2 areas are all about. So integrated reporting is a fabulous topic. It's actually not too accounting heavy. It is just integrating and bringing up more of the ideas. We're going to talk about this in a moment. But I would love to start by allowing or asking my co-speakers to introduce themselves. Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Maliah Sulaiman from the International Islamic University, Kulliyyah of Economics and Management Sciences. My research interests are in environmental accounting as well as Islamic accounting, and I teach accounting for Islamic banks and management accounting in the university. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. It's good to be back in KL again. My name is Hardik Shah. I am a sector manager with the research products team at Sustainalytics. Sustainalytics is essentially a global independent ESG research provider. So we are the ones looking at all those sustainability reports, integrated reports, etc., and converting them into like quantitative ratings, which are then used by asset managers, asset owners to take investment decisions. So that's essentially what we do. My sectoral focus is utilities, real estate, and construction. So these are the 3 industries that me and my team are responsible for. And in the panel today, I'll be bringing about, let's say, the responsible investor side of things. So how are currently investors using this kind of information, and what kind of similar learnings could be used by investors with an Islamic focus in terms of better disclosures from corporates as well as general, let's say, awareness creation. So that's going to be my focus.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Toto. I'm the Islamic Finance Research Team Leader. My company is Bloomberg. So I believe most of you know what Bloomberg services are. So we provide market data, we provide information, financial information, and also other kind of business news. So if we look back in 2007, basically that's the first interaction between Bloomberg and sustainability. Because back in 2007, Bloomberg initiated, we call it Be Green program, whereby the company try to engage the sustainability in overall aspects of business operations in our company. And then since then, we have seen much cost savings in our company operations, whereby we can save almost like 50 million US dollars. And then from there, the company founder and also the CEO at that time, Pete Grover, we thought that if we succeed with this so-called sustainability in our company, then why we cannot deliver for our customers? So since then, we try to quantify the data, and then we try to provide this data into our terminals for our customers. And it's my duty to engage the market players all over the world to aware with this new movement in the finance. So hopefully in this session, we can brainstorm, we can discuss, and we can share our opinions.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So in summary, today we have a leading academic from the Islamic finance space. Sustainalytics is the world's largest provider of sustainability data, 156 employees worldwide, and Bloomberg doesn't need any introduction anyway, so I'm delighted with this forum, and hopefully we'll get something out of that. So I was asked to engage and to make this a lively thing, so I want to ask the audience a question. I want to ask the same question at the end. I want to see if you change your mind. So I'm going to give you a choice between two companies to invest in. And there is no alternative, so there's no, I'm not investing, or I want to get out of here or something. You have to make up your mind. Number one is Marks & Spencer in the UK. So obviously everybody knows it, it does wonderful things. It's actually from a sustainability point of view, a leading company has its so-called Plan B. It is active in the community, it works around recycling, it's very, very efficient when it comes to water consumption, the production processes, many, many other things. It's a very strong fundamental, but we leave the financial aspects out for a moment. We concentrate on non-financial information. But we learned that Marks & Spencer sells about 11% of its revenues come from alcohol, so in the distribution of that. But other a well-respected, conservative, very social, excellent governance, and a strong environmental set company. I give you the choice B is, you remember the terrible accident in Bangladesh when we had 60 women died in the fire, and about a year and a half ago when the roof collapsed and over 1,000 people died producing garments. And one of the companies that lets their clothes produce there is Kik, you know, they do jeans and stuff like that. You know? So raise your hand if you put your money with Marks & Spencer, or raise your hand when you put your money with Kik. Okay, starting now. Everybody who is for Marks & Spencer, raise your hand now. I'm using raise your hands because you get away from your mobile phone and stuff. Raise it properly so the audience can see what's happening. Okay, more. Okay, you're now recorded. And B, you invest your money in Kik, in the company there. No, or some. And others have not understand the question or don't want to expose themselves. Great. So let's pick up this topic and understand the problem. So we have Islamic finance as a set of rules around what is halal, what's haram. So the so-called sin industries, alcohol, weapons, tobacco, gambling are excluded. We have leverage ratios. We have cash ratios, which are limited at a third, and we have the prohibition of interest rates. So we all know that. So that would make the Bangladeshi company a perfect example to invest in because they produce garments. Nothing wrong with that. However, the way how they treat their people is horrible. Absolutely unacceptable. And that clearly is not in line with Islamic rules. We don't need to discuss even that. But as an Islamic investor, how can you actually make sure that your money goes to a company that not only does good things for society, but she treats its people fair and takes care of the environment and has a good governance structure? And that's what integrated reporting is all about. It allows you a set of information to assess a company, how they perform on environment, social, and governance, just to give you a more holistic picture. And personally, I think that is a huge opportunity for Islamic finance to unlock the true potential in that space. And we look at Marks & Spencer, you know, a very established, outstanding, you know, retailer in the UK who makes an enormous amount of effort to work around recycling. In fact, they have a program around clothes recycling, about organic productions, about how they treat their people, about the community and the environment. They do everything well. I mean, from a sustainability point of view, a perfect company. But they're involved in alcohol, and something again that Muslim investors are just not comfortable with. So that's really the problem. I want to open up the discussion with that thought to understanding what integrated reporting actually is. I want to ask who wants to run with that question.
Sure, I think before we get into the actual discussion whether integrated reporting is beneficial, it's important to understand what exactly it is. I think general perception about integrated reporting is it's complex, it's tough, it's costly. That's partly true, but then it depends on what ambition you set out for yourself. So there is, let's say, a global standard called as IIRC, which is International Integrated Reporting Council, which has given some guidelines about what could be part of an integrated report. And I think they are very clear in the definition that they say is it should be a concise communication. So when you as a corporate are looking for publishing an integrated report or a sustainability report for that matter, it doesn't need to be too jazzy, it doesn't need to be too lengthy. That kind of, let's say, gets rid of a lot of complexity. But transparency is one of the guiding principles. It has to be concise, it has to be comparable. So if you're reporting on certain aspects and next year someone, even a layperson, should be able to see whether you've progressed or not progressed on a particular issue. And yeah, so these are some of the guiding principles what drive integrated reporting. I think nowhere or no investor demands, yeah, your report has to be a 100-page report or a 200-page report. Having said that, some of the companies, and we've seen a lot of integrated reports, or let's say a lot of corporate disclosure in general, some of the companies have like a one small ad hoc section in their annual report on, let's say, environmental and social performance. That doesn't necessarily mean an integrated report. So you need to understand what's material for your line of business and just talk about those aspects and not everything under the sun.
So can you give us an example, Hardik? So
Sure. So
a mining company, let's say. What is material to a mining company?
Since we are talking about, let's say, this region, I can take an example of a Singaporean company called City Developments. It is a real estate provider. I think they started off with their sustainability journey around 8 to 10 years back. And if you see their first sustainability report that came out back then, it was hardly anything. So I think the message is to, let's say, new starters or people who have ambitions to get into integrated reporting is very clear. Start small and then develop the strategy as you grow. So it's not like on the first year you will get a really complete or comprehensive report. That's not expected. And I think that's not something which is realistic as well, because you need to have, let's say, programs and procedures in place. So I think when the initial few years of reporting came out for city development, it was mainly tackling energy efficiency because they are essentially a real estate player. So energy efficiency in the malls that they build or office spaces, etc. And as they grow, now they are, I think in the last 2015, that's when they came out with their first integrated report, which is where they are not only talking about what are the stakeholders that they have from a regulatory perspective, from employees as well as the communities that they impact, but they're also talking about how they are creating positive or negative value.
Brilliant. If I can just summarize here. So we're talking about non-financial information, just to start very general. We're not looking at the usual balance sheet, profitability, costs, all the stuff that's backwards. In fact, what we're trying to understand is the DNA of the company. How does the company takes decisions? And we'll talk about the correlation to the stock price performance of the company as well. The first step is, how does a company perform on what we call ESG, environment, social governance? Now, if you are an analyst and you have to make a decision investing in a mining company or in a software company, there's no way you can use the same metrics, the same questions, because let's say water consumption is a big topic in mining, pretty irrelevant in software production. Health and safety, so death per 100,000 in a company in the mining space is a very important number. How are they treating and ensuring the safety of their employees versus in a software company normally wouldn't die. A governance topic, how are a minority treated? How are women allowed to prosper and rise up in the ranks of the company? How are they paid as a ratio to man is a very, very solid and important statistic. The diversity of the board How many women sit on the board? How often do they meet? What do they report? All this information are available. Bloomberg offers them, Sustainalytics offers them. It gives you a completely new perspective on a company. So just bear this in mind when we talk integrated reporting. So first question, we need to know what is material to that company. As we said, in the mining space, probably water consumption, energy consumption, the production process, health and safety. And maybe in banking and finance, we talk about governance. We talk about the control mechanisms. You might think, well, who cares? This is just, decoration. Then remember that banks in the US alone have been fined $100 billion since 2008 for bad governance. So we are talking about relevant, cost-effective things here. And if you want to make that investment decision, you want to think about the environmental, the social and governance topics on that space. Brilliant. So let's look at the Islamic side for a moment. How does Islamic finance look on these topics?
Okay. Actually, my area is in Islamic banking, accounting for Islamic banks. Now, as far as the studies that we have done on I focus on environmental issues, we really do not find much in terms of reporting on environmental issues. What we find for Islamic banks are the Sharia governance issues. These are reported to a very large extent. We have a bank that has 600 pages of the annual report where the environmental issue only focuses on just a quarter page. So this is rather alarming. As Omar said, we are talking about environmental, social, and governance issues. I guess Islamic banks are actually reporting on the social and governance issues, but as far as environmental issues are concerned, there's nothing much. So I think in US, there is the act that was passed in 1980 that actually makes banks may be liable for cleanup costs. Because when we talk of banks, we feel that they are not having products that are environmentally irresponsible. However, it's the users of those products. I mean, those companies that are actually getting loans from the banks, these are the companies that their activities may have an impact on the environment. So what we expect, I'm an academic, what we expect would be banks reporting on their responsible lending. Now, perhaps we can see that in the banks in developed countries, but not so much in Malaysia or Indonesia. So there have been studies done in Indonesia and Malaysia where nothing is said about responsible lending. So I think this is important because one has to be responsible as to whom we lend to. So if you look at the annual reports of banks, you will not see it. What you see is that you try to revive these mangrove swamps. That's so much on environment. But what investors would like to see is how responsible you have been in extending your loans. So I think we would like to see more of that instead of more, social and governance issues, yes, is important, but environment is just as important. In Islam, environment is actually being included in one of the verses, or many verses in the Quran. But unfortunately, with Islamic finance, we are all talking about Sharia governance minus the environment. So that's what I
It's a brilliant summary. Thank you so much.
Sorry,
Prof,
Omar,
tell us,
if I can add, because I think this is also good facts that we can share from Bloomberg, because I think it can add flavor into this discussion. I believe to add the information or explanation from Dr. Maliah, if we compare between the Asia developed market and Asia OIC market, probably OIC we need to include African country as well. According to our observation, if we look at these 7 Asia developed countries, it comprises of 2,766 companies that have ESG disclosure. Whereas for the OIC countries, we have more countries than Asia developed countries, which is 20 OIC countries, but we only have 421 entities with ESG disclosure. Because I believe, like Sustainalytics, we have, in Bloomberg, we have ESG disclosure score. ESG disclosure score is the scoring system that we apply in our database. So we screen all the financial reports and disclosures and filings or probably private informations that we get from the companies or from the private entities. And then from there we assess the goodness of the disclosure of these ESG aspects. And then if we look at this average ESG score, for OIC countries, they only have 16 out of 100. So means the best ESG disclosure is 100 points, but for most OIC countries, we only have 16 points. And then I think if we can share, just to add the information from Dr. Maliah, if you look at the WWF report in 2015, in Asian countries itself, probably we only have like 3 banks in the Southeast Asia region, which looks at the ESG aspects when they assess the funding. So I think this one is aspects that regulator and also the banks or financials needs to look at. So before we talk about the integrated reporting, we need to look at the ESG aspects first, and then of course the MO, because without the disclosure, we cannot have the good integrated reporting.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. So just to give you the data frame around this, we have now 5 years of integrated reporting, building up, and of course we are just at about 10% of the potential. So over time, this clearly will grow. But who will ensure, or what guarantee do I have as an investor that these numbers and these facts are actually correct? I mean, these are on a voluntary basis by the companies, and they're not audited, particularly when we come to hot topics like the CO2 emission or other things, and people can write whatever they want to. How do we ensure that these numbers are right?
Maybe I can give an example. So the challenge that us as, let's say, research providers face is, how do you convert this qualitative information into quantitative and comparable information? So let's take an example of the CO2 emissions that you just mentioned. So I think the top score in our methodology is reserved for a company which not only, let's say, measures the CO2 emissions, but also externally verifies them. So again, that's like the best it gets. If you just measure it yourself and there is no mention about external verification, you would probably not get a score of 100, you might get a score of 70, for instance. So that's where we give value to, let's say, assurance or verification, third-party verification. That's one aspect. Second is when we see these reports on a daily basis. So one of the biggest tasks that we as an analyst do is to separate the greenwashing, or is what we call as greenwashing, so just talking good stuff but doesn't mean anything in essence, from the actual real actions. So again, there are many players like us in the market, and I think having let's say, a standard scale to measure performance is what will give you that, let's say, confidence as an investor that this information is, let's say, verified and consistent across the years.
As far as Islamic finance is concerned, we have a religious aspect there. And when we talk about religion, in Islam, we talk about accountability to Allah and accountability to the masses. We talk about vertical and horizontal. Therefore, even without assurance, I think it is the responsibility of each bank to actually report on the correct metrics. So this is something like, talking about religion here, you're talking about ethics. So I wouldn't expect companies to actually waffle with the figures. Yeah.
It's very true. Very good point. I would add to that about 70% of all the S&P 500 companies, report in the ESG space. They offer a corporate social responsibility report. cynics would say that the more beautiful the report is, the worse is the performance actually. It's just a marketing tool, but we're clearly heading in the right direction here. And if you think in the conventional finance space, 50 years ago, there was no such thing as an IFR or GAAP or other standards, or there's no auditing. When you were an investor, you had to rely on what the company would provide you in terms of information. And over time, it became standardized, controlled, more reliable. And I would argue that this is something that we're going to see over time, as clearly the topic will become more and more relevant around environment, around other values that are touching all of us. So let me ask you then the next question, which I want to understand. So we understand Islamic finance really well. We see this integrated reporting coming up from the other side, interesting tool. How likely is it that Islamic institutions will actually integrate that, take the benefit of that, use it? In other words, be prepared to change, to evolve. Who wants to take that?
Okay, probably I can start first. Okay, in my personal opinion, and also based on my experience with market data, I think it's already discussed also in the previous sessions and also probably addressed by Brother Hardik and Dr. Maliah, that now we Islamic finance players are more tied to the legality or just on the Sharia rules or Sharia principles. For example, in the stocks screening, most of the Sharia stock screeners, they only tied to those negative screening. So we only look at the business segments and then financial screening. So why don't we look at the ESG? Why don't we look at the sustainability? Whereby the sustainability is part of the Maqasid Sharia, objective of Sharia. And I think it's all Muslims' duty to ensure that Maqasid Sharia is achieved through the Islamic finance. So I think first from the stock screening, we can make some move to embrace integrated reporting and to embrace the ESG aspects when we do the stock screening. So this is the initiative that Bloomberg has done. So we are collaborating with ISRA. So we and ISRA look at the traditional way to screen the stocks, whereby we look at the negative screening, but we also look at the ESG aspects.
So to cut you short here, but is it going to happen or not, in your opinion? Will Islamic institutions embrace or look at integrated reporting and make it part of their own process? Doesn't mean everything and in a whole way, but will they take advantage of that, yes or no?
Unfortunately, no, because also based on our recent research that we do together with INSIF, that we haven't seen quite good results from the OIC banks that we observe in terms of the ESG practice and ESG disclosure in their financial report. And again, the average scores that we have on the ESG aspects is only 16. And then most of the larger banks, they tend to embrace the ESG reporting practice. I think it's because, once the banks becomes bigger, once the Islamic financial institution becomes bigger, then they have more team or they have more departments where this department can oversee all, the compliance, including the ESG aspects. Yeah. So I think this is one of the starting facts that we have to look at.
So we have seen today two outstanding institutions from the Islamic space, Setco and Satuna Capital, making a huge move towards sustainable investing and fully embracing it. Hopefully they are positive examples. So I want to pass the same question on, hopefully a little more optimism here. Okay. What do you think about Islamic institutions, not just banks, but Islamic institutions embracing integrated reporting, ESG?
I think the key question is, what is the driver for them to do that, right? So if you limit yourself to be just compliant to Sharia laws, then you don't need any additional disclosure. So that is, in that sense, the case is closed. So you don't need, or you will not be asking as an Islamic investor more information. But if you look at it from the other perspective, in addition to the Sharia screening, this could be used as an, let's say, additional cherry picking exercise. So you have, let's say, out of 1,000 companies, 300 being compliant with Islamic laws. So that's your investable universe. Then on top of that, then you apply not necessarily ESG screens, but kind of what we call as best in class approach. So which are the better ESG performers? So if you just want to invest in one utility company and there are two of them, which one is the better performer? That could drive your investment decision. So if that is the kind of approach that Islamic institutions or investors in general would want to take, with the belief that this would lead to either risk mitigation, that's one aspect, or so there's a small set of responsible investors who also believe that this creates the alpha, which is the additional value or the additional return.
Yeah.
In that scenario, yes, they will be pushing corporates to disclose more. But if you just look at it from the compliance perspective, the driver is not strong enough.
Understood. So Mr. Siddiq said this morning, women are the force for change. We put our hope on you. What do you think? Islamic institutions will or will not embrace?
I think there's a lot for Islamic financial institutions in terms of integrated reporting, because I feel that I beg to differ with Hardik when he said that, since you're only interested in Sharia compliance, now Sharia compliance also include environmental issues that you have to tackle with. Therefore, I think one should go for that. I mean, Islamic financial institutions should go for this integrated reporting. And the way to go about it, like all developing countries, Islamic finance is a relatively new field. It has to be mandated. Otherwise, if you leave it to the Islamic financial institutions, like you said, what is it in it for me? So generally, people will ask that. But I think you would know, Omar, that a lot of studies have shown that if you are environmentally responsible, socially responsible, profits tend to be positive in the long term. So I think this short-termism should actually be addressed first. So when you talk about long term, there's no two ways about it, that you have to report on the environment and the social and the governance aspect. But I think Islamic banks, governance issues, I think they're very good. If you look at the annual report, pages and pages of what do you call it? Governance, Sharia governance, corporate governance. But environment, I am very sad to say, 2014 I went through the annual reports of 16 banks in Malaysia, 16 Islamic banks. There's one bank that actually has sustainability report at the end. Others have got the most has got 1 page of environment. That too, they never indicated about responsible lending, So this is something that I think consumers would look for, particularly for banks who want to go to developed countries. I think that's what they look. I think you should know better. Arabesque does that, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So that's a very interesting point of discussion. I'd like to focus on that a little bit. So if we can agree that these elements, environment, social governance, or in other words, when we talk about the UN values, which is the same thing, 4 major principles, independent of any religion, it's human rights, it's labor law, it is the environment and anti-corruption. And no matter what your color, what your gender, what your belief is, everybody can agree on these minimum principles. Now, I don't get a Sharia stamp for that because, frankly, it's so inherent in Islamic religion that we don't think that we need to get that stamp. However, we ignore it, or we don't capture it because we don't have the information. Now, the opportunity to get those information is actually on the table. 1, 2, the correlation between a company that does well on ESG and the stock price of the company is absolutely clear. There's no two ways about it. In other words, if you have a company that takes care of its resources, how much water it spends, how much electricity, and other materials. And I'll give you one simple example. Coca-Cola used to be the world's biggest user of water, with the cleaning of the bottles and stuff. And then they had something they called the CEO water mandate. They changed their entire production process. They managed to save 10% of the water consumption. That translates into 60 billion liters per year. Please look up that number. They save 60 billion liters per year just by changing their production process. I'm asking you, is that smart or not? When you are assessing a company as an investor, that's a useful information. Another example, we look at mining. We look at the production of copper. To split the copper from the stone, you need a dioxin. Now look at two companies, A and B. A would just put the dioxin in the water and the river, in the ocean or whatever, and just pollute the environment. We buy the dioxin. Company B would actually recycle the dioxin and reuse it. Over time, B is actually cheaper. So again, as an investor, I have a chance here to use how they treat the environment as a tool to see how innovative they are, how smart they are. And it's an indicator for all the other decisions they take as a management. We spoke about governance. Has anybody any doubt that if you treat your people well in a company, that the company will outperform the one if you treat your people worse? Of course, you can squeeze them for a little while, but eventually they're just going to go away. They don't like it. It's a very interesting statistic from the US, which tells you that 3 from 5 people wouldn't mind if the company they work in would have a problem, an incident, or would go under. Because the relationship to the company is so negative because they're so squeezed. They don't feel fully aligned with this company. Look at another company where people are fully involved, fully engaged, motivated, like to come to work. Clearly, this company will outperform. We don't need to debate that. So coming back to my topic, why is it that we would think that Islamic institutions would have now the opportunity to do actually what Islamic is all about, which is ethics, to implement your true values? Never mind if you get the Sharia stamp or not, it doesn't bother. It's just something you do extra. And in fact, you're going to get better result for your clients, for your investors. Why would we not do that? And I never understand that. And I want to throw a thesis here, and you please comment on that. Is it maybe that we are so, not obedient, but so respectful to the Islamic religion that we just don't dare to divert left and right, or even be seen as diverting left and right? So embracing something new that actually is very much in line with our religion, why wouldn't we do that?
Can I just
Please.
answer? I think as far as Islamic finance, Islamic banks are concerned, now, like I said, it is relatively new. So most importantly, they want to look at Sharia governance. That's it. And not understanding the fact that accountability encompasses all, environmental, social, as well as the Sharia governance. But most of the banks are just going for Sharia governance. So I think they should have on the agenda to look into environmental. Social, I think they have done quite a bit. So that's what I feel, that they are just going for, this could be the initial stage. Perhaps later on they will embrace integrated reporting. And I sure hope so, because the religion of Islam, or any religion for that matter, like you said, you have to emphasize on environment, on social. Of course, governance is important. So therefore, I think we need to have that change in mental paradigm. We need to change and say, we have to be accountable, and not only on one aspect, on all these aspects. That's
Brilliant. Thank you so much. How do you guys see that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg story as well. So the question is, what was stopping you as an investor from asking these things? I think one of the common answers is there's not enough disclosure. So the issue is corporates aren't disclosing because either the regulator or the investor or both are not asking for it. So I think what you've seen in Southeast Asia in general, and specifically in Malaysia and Singapore recently, is the stock exchanges are now pushing corporates. If you want to list on our stock exchange, you have to disclose sustainability information. It is still, let's say, a more questionnaire-based approach, which is not ideal, but certainly a good starting point. So as an you as an investor, if you go to a corporate and say, I need this information either to stay invested or I will divest, and that is something which holds much bigger value, and that will get them kind of listening. So it's not that investors don't want to look at it. I think they right now it's an easy excuse that there's, even if we want to look at it, there's hardly 10% companies who talk about it, so it's not going to essentially matter much, because maybe not a large part of those 10% are based in Europe, and probably US might not meet your Islamic or Sharia filters. So in a way, it's not necessarily a relevant universe for me. But then if the understanding is fairly consistent that this adds value, and which is again one of the, let's say, the goals that you have when you are investing based on Sharia principles, if that is agreed upon, then I think there's nothing stopping them from asking more disclosure, because as companies become transparent, they are become more accountable, and yeah, it's a digital world. You can't hide something once you disclose it. So yeah.
Okay, so if I can share my story, because as Islamic finance research team leader in my company, I have to deal with questions from our internal stakeholders and from external stakeholders from all parts of the world. And most of the questions that they ask me is that, why you guys, for the last 20 years, you've just been, talking about and, discussing about how many percent that this business is non-Sharia compliant and how many percent that this leverage should be Sharia compliance. Why you cannot be like those ethical funds, which looks more into the E, S, and probably we also talk about G. But those ethical funds talks more about E and S aspects. So I don't know, if I try to relate with my experience when I was with the Indonesian accounting standard team, in beginning 2000, at that time, Indonesia just escaped from the financial crisis in 97. And at that time, disclosure of the countries in the companies are very low. And because of the pressures from the external investors, and also at that time there was sponsor from the World Bank, there was move by the Indonesian accounting standard and the Ministry of Finance to standardize the Indonesian accounting standard to IFRS. And then, since then, we can see that most of the companies in Indonesia, especially those listed companies, the disclosure are quite naked. So probably if you compare, between Indonesia companies and the other Asian companies, you can see more disclosures on the notes. And I think from my perspective, and when I try to relate this experience, that the successful of this integrated reporting, especially for the Islamic finance, and we see that, the development of the Islamic finance is more like guided industry by the government. So I think the regulators and the standard bodies, standard setters bodies, have to play more roles in this area. Because, for example, like us in data providers and probably Sustainalytics as well, that when we look at the financial reports, it's very good if we can see the company already apply GRI4, for example. And for example, like me, when I look at the financial report of the Singapore companies, then I'm very happy because they have the map of the E and SG, and we just put the data into database like that. It's very easy. But if we look at the other companies, even they don't have a strong accounting standard, then forget it. I think it's very far to talk about the integrated report, even though integrated report is very important. So I believe the role of the regulator and then standard setter bodies and probably, from the industry itself, the association is very important here.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So I just want to clarify that we're not saying replace one with the other. We're not saying, give up any Islamic rules or regulations for the benefit of ESG. We're just saying use ESG information to make your product better. And I always feel that Islamic finance so far has been produced or sold in a way this is compliant with your rules and your regulations, and hence you have to accept a lower return. Of course, there were times where it outperformed, like when we had the financial crisis. But overall, it's just the fact that it doesn't. And the same is true for the ESG side, by the way. You had underperformance here as well. However, what we, for example, found out in our firm is that when you combine them, you actually can generate a better performance. Negative screening and the best-in-class approach allows you to do better investment decisions. You prevent negative investments. Good examples, Volkswagen, Toshiba, British Petroleum, and others. These were all companies that you managed to avoid simply by not going there. So I want to be, again, a bit challenging here. Isn't it so that we, on the Islamic side, maybe, we pick and choose what we like, what's convenient, and what we don't like, we don't? If you allow me an extreme example, I was invited in Germany at a conference talking about something that I found pretty irrelevant, which is, or somebody asked about the, beards. should Muslim men have a beard or not? And my answer was, who cares? Who cares? You think this is your religion? You're just wrong. I said, no, we need to copy everything that the Prophet ﷺ did. I said, is that true? Well, in the 7th century in Saudi Arabia, every man who could grow a beard did grow a beard, no matter if you're Christians or Jewish or whatever you preferred, simply because you live in a desert and there was nothing to shave. Try to shave yourself with your kitchen knife. It had a better quality than any knife could have possibly had in the 7th century. You would have taken skin off. And the last thing you would do is, in a place where you have no water, is to go and waste it on your face. Every man had a beard. That is not Islam. It had nothing to do with that. So my counter question was, raise your hand if you use an iPhone or a phone. Raise your hand if you've ever flown on a plane, yes? So how come you want to pick what you like, what's useful, but when it comes to other things, you don't? And that's something I want to ask us in finance. Why don't we, choose the instruments that help us to do a better job? And not having to worry that we were called non-Islamic or, that people will say, oh, you guys are, deserting us or anything like this. Why don't we try? Not a rhetorical question. Who wants to answer?
I think, I'm not an expert on Islamic finance, but I think my view on this is someone who's, let's say, influential, it could be one of the bigger banks or one of the bigger associations, need to take that first step. So the way corporate reporting has improved in the region over the last few years is because, yes, SGX, because Bursa Malaysia, Taiwan, Korea, all of them have said you have to report or else you cannot list on our stock exchanges, and that is a clear trigger. In case where we are expecting investors who are basically investing based on Islamic laws to adopt ESG, I think one of the bigger players has to take that bold step. So I can give you a parallel in Japan. Historically, governance was widely used in screening companies, but overall they were never really strong on ESG in terms of from the investor side, the pressure from investor side. Last year, the GPIF, which is the biggest pension fund in the world, signed on to the principles of responsible investment. And now we, and I'm pretty sure all other service providers as well, are receiving a lot of queries from Japanese asset managers and asset owners saying, how do we integrate ESG? So I think, is that tipping point, that trigger needs to be there. One big player has to take that bold step. Otherwise, I don't see any bottleneck or any major hindrance to adoption.
Super. Short answer from my...
I think, like I said, it has to be mandatory. And where banks are concerned, I think central bank should play a bigger role in that. And I'm always reminded by Commissioner Alice Walter, the Securities Exchange Commission of America, when she said that disclosure is not about obligation. Disclosure is about telling your story. So whatever stories that you have to tell it the way it is. And if Islam says accountability is accountability to social, taking into account environmental, social, and governance, so be it. Then we should follow. After all, this is Islamic finance. Okay, thanks.
Toto.
Again, because my thesis is Islamic finance is more or less guided industry. So I would say that regulator, I agree with the other panelists. And then also say, if regulator or government try to, not to take this part, a major part at this point of time, then probably, the other market organizers like stock exchange should play more role. Because for example, like in Southeast Asia, if we try to compare stock exchanges across Southeast Asia, those exchanges that impose the ESG practice in the reporting, we can see more ESG compliance or integrated reporting compliance in all these companies. So for example, like Singapore, and I believe Malaysia Bursa Malaysia started to have the ESG index. Unfortunately, my country, Indonesia, hasn't been serious about this. They try to invite the NGO to create the ESG index, but it's not imposed by the stock exchange. So I think, in my opinion, the impact is not big. So I guess the regulator, market organizers, or probably association.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We want to wrap up with a question. I obviously asked a question at the beginning. I want to ask a slightly more refined question now at the end to summarize our thinking process. So there is rules around, let's call it religious investing, because I don't want to just make it only Islamic. I want to include everybody else. So you have values in your belief, and you have a financial product that covers that. So in Islamic finance, clearly our OFI standards, for example, or the Malay standards here. And we have the opportunity to now use a new set of information, which is integrated reporting. You don't just look at the company based on what they produce, their leverage ratios and so on, or using of interest rates, but you also can use information to assess how they treat their people, how they're about the environment and their governance structure. And if you can assume for a moment that this contributes to the performance, so in other words, it will become a better product. It's an investment, you have to work hard, but it will do that. Raise your hand, please, if you as a personal investor, for your money, for your children's saving or for the education you want to put aside, whatever you want to do with the money, if you have a chance to invest that is in line with your faith plus social responsible, and it gives you equal or better performance, would you invest in that? Raise your hand now. Brilliant. You can sign up to our fund over there.